Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this third webinar in our series for the ILC Ready program. My name's Meg Drexler, and along with my colleagues here at Community Business Bureau, we're delighted to welcome you. Thanks to funding from the South Australia's Department of Human Services through its NDIA Community Inclusion and Capacity Development Grant, the ILC Ready program is free. Joining us today, we have people from all kinds of organisations, big and small. We have experienced grant applicants and people who've never done a grant application before. This webinar, and indeed our whole ILC Ready program, is for all of you. If you are experienced, then some of the information we present today might be familiar, but please stick around because we'll be sharing some new stuff and you'll also have the chance to share your knowledge in our interactive Q&A. Before we get started, I'm going to share some tips to help you get the most out of the ILC Ready program and today's webinar. This is the last in a series of webinars, and you can catch up on the first two on our website, cbb.com.au/ILC. Still to come in the ILC Ready program, we have a full-day live workshop touring the state next month. No, this month now. It's the 1st of August, touring later this month. There's also the opportunity for organisations across South Australia to apply for individual support from our consultants ready to develop a proposal for a future ILC grant. A little bit more on that later. If you know anyone else who'd like to join us, please feel free to share our website with them too. This is an interactive program, so the more people get involved, the more we'll be able to learn together and from each other. On your screen, you'll see some tools that will help you interact with me and the other people attending today. At any time, you can write a message in the chat window on the right of your screen, and a number of you have already introduced yourselves, so thank you. This will be seen by everybody and will also be viewable on a recording of this webinar that will be available later on our website. If you don't see that chat window, you might just need to click in the bottom right-hand corner for it to pop up. My colleague Kirsten Tate is moderating today. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi, everyone.
If you have any technical questions, you can write a message to Kirsten in the chat window too. Now, there are also some ways you can post a question. Click or tap on questions, and you'll see all the questions that have been posted. That's at the bottom of the screen. You can vote for your favourites or ask your own. You can also add something in the chat window as a question just by hovering your mouse over the chat and tapping the question mark. If email is more accessible for you, you can also email us, ilc@cbb.com.au. We're watching our email and Kirsten will be able to share your question with the group straight away. We'll answer as many questions as we can in about 45 minutes when we start our live Q&A. And joining me today, we have Kathryn from the Disability Elders of All Ages. Before you leave the webinar today, please share your feedback by clicking on polls at the bottom of the screen. So I hope you enjoy today. Remember, ask some questions anytime and vote for your favourites. Today, I'll be taking you step by step through the process of planning, applying for and delivering an ILC grant-funded project. First, we'll touch on designing a project for impact. We'll look at planning the activities you'll do, the resources you'll need, and some of the different kinds of collaboration that you can use to help you manage your project, including auspicing. We'll tour the Community Grants Hub to show you how to access grant requirements so that you can decide if a grant is the right opportunity for you, and we'll share some hot tips for writing your application. We'll look at what's involved in running a project once you've run a grant. Run a grant? What's involved in running a project once you have won a grant? I don't know who writes this stuff. Throughout today, we'll share real-life experiences from organisations that are already running their own ILC projects. And finally, we'll introduce you to the consultants that will be running the free workshops this month. And we'll answer your questions about those workshops and also how you can apply for one-to-one support to develop your project. So on with the show. Let's start with designing your project. Now, the ILC offers so many opportunities for our communities and also for the organisations who take part in running an ILC grant-funded project. The ILC is part of the National Disability Strategy, and its vision is an inclusive society that enables people with disability to fulfil their potential as equal citizens. So if you also believe in that vision and think your organisation could get involved, then the very first step is to get inspired. If you have a look around at what's happening in your community, you could find an unmet need or a problem that needs solving. In our previous webinars, we've seen how different ILC projects are addressing needs in their communities. We saw examples of how organisations of all kinds and all sizes are using ILC funding to keep a good thing going or reach more people with an existing project. We've seen examples of doing quite small things that make a big impact. We've seen how ILC can help people with disability who might not be eligible for an NDIS plan, how projects can create opportunities for people with disability, but also make the changes that we need to see in the community to make it more inclusive and to help people with specific needs or circumstances as well. So you can go back and look at our previous webinars for some of those examples if you want some inspiration. The next step, once you've got some inspiration, is to design a project that meets real needs in your community. To be eligible for an ILC grant, your project needs to align with one of the 4 ILC outcomes, and they're different for each ILC program. The 4 ILC grant programs are the Individual Capacity Building Program, that funds peer support and other projects to build the knowledge, skills, and confidence of people with disability. The National Information Program, it's aiming to create a nationally consistent base of information about disabilities, and it funds information activities and resources so that people with disability will have the information they need to make informed choices. The Mainstream Capacity Building's outcome is to make the services that we all use more inclusive, things like the health system and education system, so that people with disability benefit from the same services that we all use. And the Economic and Community Participation Program funds projects that create opportunities for work, recreation and living, so that people with a disability will benefit from the same community activities as everyone else. So if this is the first time you're joining us today, again, you can learn more about those grant programs in our first webinar, ILC The Big Picture, which is available on our website. Next, in design, you need to create the activities that you'll do to meet those outcomes. In our second webinar, we looked at the general investment principles that guide those 4 ILC programs. Across all of the ILC, the NDIA is looking for projects that are evidence-based. That means that they answer a real need using a solution that's likely to work, that are led by and for people with disability and their families, that are replicable and scalable to national impact, meaning that they're ideas with legs that could be used in different places all over Australia or made bigger over time. They're looking for activities that support a sustainable NDIS, meaning that the projects help prevent people needing specialised support from an NDIS plan, for example, making mainstream services better or preventing conditions from getting worse. Finally, they're looking for activities that help important groups like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people from different cultural backgrounds, people who are LGBTIQ, or people in regional or remote areas. Which investment principles are most important will vary depending on the requirements of each grant round. For more, you can catch up on that second webinar, Making an Impact, again on our website. Now we come to our first hot tip for designing your project. When you're designing it, identify your strengths and build on them. It's important to know that you don't need to be an NDIS provider or even work in the disability sector to make an impact. You might have a special skill that can make a difference through an ILC grant. Here's an example. The Australian Migrant Resource Centre, or AMRC, is a user-led organisation helping newly arrived migrants settle into life in Australia. They're governed by new and emerging migrant communities and staffed by people from those communities. Before the ILC, they didn't have much understanding of the disability sector other than providing direct referral. Their ILC project was one of the first funded back in 2017. The idea came about by listening to people in new and emerging migrant communities. It was at an ethnic leaders forum that the AMRC were reminded that refugees arriving in the 1990s, 2000s and now are dealing with issues related to disability, alongside the challenges of settlement in a new country. Many of them had injuries that were becoming more difficult with age, and many were arriving with injuries and finding the pathways to assessment and support difficult to access. So the Australian Migrant Resource Centre applied for ILC funding to train its staff to better understand the disability supports that are available. Those staff have become messengers in their own communities, helping people with disability, their families and carers to better understand disability and reduce stigma, to find out what's available to them and access pathways to services, and to build the confidence of those communities to engage with the disability services sector, all in their own language and in a way that's culturally safe. The training resources that the AMRC have developed through ILC funding are now part of their usual policies and service planning. They've also shared resources with mainstream providers through a series of workshops, a published handbook, and ongoing forums that link migrant communities with service providers. The picture you see on the screen now is some of the AMRC stakeholders at the launch of their handbook, Culturally Responsive Services, a resource for NDIS service providers. The outcome, having informed family members and workers, will mean that people with disability in migrant communities are no longer alone. Migrant community groups have also learnt from each other through this project about ways to include people of all abilities within their communities, doing things like providing forums for input into decision making and engaging with partners and others in specific sectors. Now, work in addressing the needs of migrants with disabilities is far from finished. There will be more to do as the profile of new arrivals changes, as management committees of community organisations change, as sector personnel change, and as the NDIS continues to mature. But for the AMRC, using ILC funding to build on its existing strengths has also created opportunities beyond the initial ILC project. The AMRC's Launch into Work project now has 5 trained and accredited staff working directly with clients referred to that employment program through the NDIS. And this year, the AMRC also started the Test, Try and Learn project. They're recruiting and training 80 women to become qualified support workers and gain experience and employment in the disability sector. You can find out more about those initiatives at the link Kirsten's posting now. So, we've just heard how the Australian Migrant Resource Centre has used its strengths to make a difference. Another hot tip, take some time to reflect on your strengths as an organisation. What do you do best of all? And how could that strength help achieve one of the ILC's outcomes? That might help you find an opportunity, and that's the start of a great ILC project idea. Once you have a great idea, it's time to move on to planning. What will you need to do to turn your idea into a project? First, you'll need to work out the kinds of activities you'll need to do. Our workshops will help you do just that. Bookings are now open, and we'll tell you more about these workshops at the end of today's webinar. Once you have your list of activities, you need to think about how you can deliver them. That means assessing your resources. You will need to think about both your capacity, how much effort in time and money you have to spend, and your capability. Does your organisation have the skills and knowledge to do this activity? If you have enough of both, you can deliver the activity yourself. If you have the capability, but not enough time or money, you might look for funds to grow the resources you already have. For example, hiring a project manager as part of your grant. If you don't have the skills or capacity to do something, you could outsource delivery of one activity to a partner or budget for professional help. For example, hiring a media production company to make a video. Maybe you have time to do something but don't have the capability to do it yourself. You might hire in an expert to help deliver part of the project with you and build your team's capability at the same time. This is how CPB's consultants work. Now for some real-life learning about resourcing. In our last edition of this webinar, we spoke to Sue Horsnell, CEO of HCO, about their project. So if you want to hear Sue's interview, you can on our website by looking at the recording. We talked about HCO's ILC Grant. They use their funds to extend their successful Neighbourhood Links program to new areas. At the time that HCO applied for that ILC grant, they were in the process of transitioning their existing clients from block funding to individually funded NDIS plans. The Neighbourhood Links program was block funded too, and that would be ending soon. So HCO realised that the Neighbourhood Links model wouldn't fit into NDIS funded supports. So being keen to keep this successful program running, they jumped at the chance to not only keep the program going, but also extend its reach. Now, while HCO didn't need to start from scratch with this project, there was a lot of work involved in growing the program at the same time as transitioning their core services to the NDIS. Sue's advice when it comes to resourcing: make sure you budget for the cost of starting your new program. That might include promoting the program to attract participants or hiring extra people to manage the program, especially in its initial stages. Depending on the rules of the grant round you're applying for, these are both costs that could be included in your grant-funded budget. Now, you'll only be able to claim the cost of staff that are working on the ILC project, and you cannot use ILC grant money to fund services you already get paid for through NDIS plans. If, like Sue, you're an NDIS provider, think about what parts of your ILC project need dedicated staff and what you could contribute from your own corporate staff pool without generating any conflict of interest. So, by looking at your resources, you're going to find some things you can do and other areas where you'll need to team up with others. You can get help by hiring contractors, applying for a grant together with other organisations who share your goals in a consortium, or less formal types of collaboration. We talked about this more in webinar 2. Today, we're going to look a bit more closely at auspicing. In some ILC grant programs, like the Individual Capacity Building Program, the NDIA will be looking for applications specifically from organisations led by and for people with disability or priority groups. Some of these groups may be unincorporated organisations. Our next hot tip is for you. If you're a community-based group and not a legal entity in your own right, you can apply for an ILC grant by working with an auspicer. An auspicer is a separate organisation who manages the... An auspicer is a separate organisation that manages the grant money and sometimes offers other practical support for the group delivering the ILC project. Now, here's an example. Disability Elders of All Ages is a peer support group that's run by and for people with a physical disability. The group was formed in 2015 to provide mutual support and share ideas with others who have similar experiences. The idea is to share wisdom and experience no matter your age. JFY is another group. They've been going since 2008. They're a group of young people living with disability who advocate and advise on issues related to young people and disability. They also run a peer network and a mentoring program. Both of these organisations have won ILC grants under the DPFO, or Disabled Peoples and Families Organisations round that was released late last year. JFY are going to use their funds to hire expertise to help them become incorporated in their own right, and also recruit an executive officer to support their initiatives. The Disability Elders of All Ages are using their grant to pay for a project officer to support the group to develop and train a team of peer connectors. These leaders will share knowledge and experience in self-management and self-directed supports. Both groups are auspiced by Purple Orange, a much larger incorporated social profit organisation. Purple Orange are on a mission to create a world where people who live with disability have a fair go at what life has to offer. They listen to, learn from, and work alongside people who live with disability to develop policy and practice that makes a difference. Now, unincorporated entities can't hire staff, so as well as managing the grant funds, as auspicer, Purple Orange provides staff. One of these staff is Kathryn Mills. She is the Policy Officer for the Disability Elders of All Ages ILC project, and we'll be talking with Kathryn today in our live Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do post them now or at any time. So Purple Orange is providing resources for disability elders, but the Disability Elders of All Ages retain control of their project. If you are thinking about auspicing, think about it as an opportunity to mentor and support a growing organisation. The end aim is to grow their independence. Supporting user-led and peer support organisations in this way is part of Purple Orange's strategic direction, and they already had provided some in-kind support to help the disability elders get started. With auspicing, that's allowed both groups to hire the staff they need to grow and develop their independence. So last but not least, in your planning, your budget. To build your budget, you're going to need to know what your activities will cost. You'll need to decide what you can fund yourself and what can be funded through the specific ILC grant you're applying for. It's important to ask for the right amount of funding, because once your grant's agreed, you won't be able to get extra funds. So 2 more hot tips here. Always work with GST exclusive figures. The community grant system where you lodge your application will automatically add the GST for you if you're GST registered. Secondly, if you want to build in CPI increases, you need to factor that into your costing. So you have your idea and you've done your plan, and now an ILC grant round has been announced. Woohoo! You're going to have about 4 weeks to read and understand the grant requirements, to draft your response, to get feedback from any partners and stakeholders. Stakeholders are the people that are involved in or impacted by your project. Review to see if the opportunity is right for you. Refine and edit your response to answer the grant requirements within the word limits you'll be given, and submit. Then later on, if you win, you'll need to be prepared to deliver. So with all of that to do in 4 weeks, I bet you're glad you had your project idea ready to go. Let's take these all one at a time. First, before we do a hot tip, make sure you know when an ILC grant is released or awarded by signing up to the NDIA's ILC newsletter. It's quite a long link, so Kirsten will post it now, but if you go to www.ndis.gov.au and search for ILC, you should find a link there with general information and a sign up to their newsletter at the bottom of the page. Once the grant opportunity is released, the Department of Social Services Community Grants Hub is the place to go to learn about and apply for your grant. Before we head on over to the Grants Hub, just a note of caution. The information in this webinar is general in nature and is not official advice from the NDIA or the Community Grants Hub. So if you're going to apply for a grant, make sure you read the requirements in the official documents. If you do have general questions about ILC grants, we can forward them on to the NDIA for you. And if you have questions about a current grant when one's released, you can also ask questions through the Community Grants Hub. So let's go to the Community Grants Hub. You can visit by going to www.communitygrants.gov.au. I'm going to give you a bit of a tour. So it's a good idea to subscribe at this website as well, because it has ILC grants as well as other community grants. If you scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, you can subscribe for updates on new grants or find out when there's been changes to existing grants. Back at the top of the page, search for grants, put in ILC, and you'll get a list of all the past and current ILC grants. We're going to unpack the Disabled Peoples and Families Organisation's ILC Readiness Grant Round to show you what's included. The top of the page for each grant tells you the status of the grant round, whether it's open or closed. This round closed back in December. The closing date and time is when you need to have your application submitted by. You can see what areas the grant is for. This one was available nationally. The selection process tells you how the grant will be awarded. Now, the selection process can be open or restricted. Open means that anyone eligible can apply. Open processes are advertised through the media, the Hub website, Grant Connect, and other sources to attract as much interest as possible. Restricted grants are targeted to specific organisations who are directly invited to apply. This selection process is used when there are few providers available or there's time constraints. The selection process can be competitive or non-competitive. In a competitive selection process, grants have an open and close date and set selection criteria against which they're assessed. In a non-competitive process, applications are still assessed against selection criteria, but individually, not compared with other applications. Sometimes grants are one-off. They're designed to meet a specific need or often urgent special circumstances. One-off grants don't have a planned selection process and you won't see them on the Community Grants website. If you scroll down from the top, you'll find a summary of the objectives of the grant and who's eligible to apply. For full details, you need to scroll down further to download and read the grant opportunity documents. The grant opportunity guidelines are the key thing to read, along with the questions and answers. This will tell you everything you know to be able to apply for the grant. These can be available in easy English too. The grant conditions and supplementary terms are examples of the types of legal terms and conditions you can expect to see in a grant agreement if you're successful. If you read these, you'll be informed of what will be expected if you get the grant. And if you have questions, you can ring the Community Grants Hub hotline. Sometimes there's also a sample general grant agreement here as well. Finally, there might be some templates for you to use in your application. To apply for this grant, applicants needed to set out their project's budget in a specific way. That's what the template's for. If they were applying with another organisation acting as auspicer, there was a template for that too. So you can save yourself a lot of time later in the process by looking at all of these documents right at the start. It's important to be comfortable with the terms and conditions so you don't get a surprise when you're successful. Any templates will help to make sure you have all the information that's needed and might make the process of putting things together faster. When you're ready, you can start your grant application by clicking Apply just below the grant opportunity documents. After the grant has been awarded, if you weren't successful, you'll be able to read feedback from the team who assessed all the grants above the grant opportunity documents. Now, let's look at one of those requirements documents. There are a few key areas to look at to decide if this grant is the right fit for your project and your organisation. The introduction will tell you about the process by which the grant will be awarded and general information about the aims of the grant. There'll be details of the grant amount, how long it will go for, if there's a maximum amount, and how many grants will be awarded. That can be useful to give you an idea of the average sort of grant size. There'll be eligibility to tell you who can apply and how. This part also often tells you the sort of capabilities that applicants are expected to have. The guidelines will say what kind of grant activities it will fund and what the money can and can't be used for. It'll set out the selection criteria that will be used to assess your application and might also have directions about what you need to include in your response. Finally, it'll set out what will be expected if you win the grant. So if you look at that and think, yes, you are eligible and your project fits with the sort of activities the grant's looking for, the next step is to draft a response. It doesn't need to be detailed at this stage. So just for each of the selection criteria, jot down what's required, how your project meets this, and what evidence you have or could get to prove that. It's a good idea to get feedback from your stakeholders here. They might suggest ways you can make your evidence stronger by adding or removing information. Then review what you've got. You should have a good picture of whether this grant is right for your project. If it's not, perhaps it could be with some changes or help from others, or you could look for other sources of funding. If it is a good fit for your project, go back and read the document again in detail. Then start refining your application. Now, your writing doesn't need to be poetic, just concise, clear, and full of good evidence that your project meets the grant requirements. Finally, persist. The disability elders of all ages applied for funding from different sources a few times before they were successful, so don't give up. The Community Grants Hub has more hot tips as well. If you click on Information, you'll find a range of fact sheets to help you with topics like how to prepare strong evidence, the financial information you need to put in a grant application, the sort of processes you need in place to manage your grant, and help with resourcing your project. You can also contact the Community Grants Hub for help on their hotline. It's 1800 020 283. So let's imagine that now you've got your application together, you're really happy with it, and you've clicked Submit on the Community Grants Hub. It's on its way. Your application is going to be seen by a few different people. First, the team at the Community Grant Hub checks your application that you're eligible and assesses you against the selection criteria. Applications that meet the criteria get passed on to the Selection Advisory Panel. They make recommendations to the delegate about which applicants should be awarded funding, how much, and with what conditions. The delegate is the person who makes the final decision. Successful applicants are told, and the Community Grants Hub enters the decision into their system. From there, grant agreements are created, using a standard grant agreement as a basis and including any details and conditions relevant to your specific project. The draft agreement is checked and a final agreement goes to you with a formal grant offer. Now, the deadline for you to sign and return that agreement can be as little as 10 to 30 days. If you don't respond in time, the offer will lapse. So to make sure you get your grant, read all the documents on the Community Grants Hub so you know what to expect ahead of time. And check your email. The contact person that you nominate can't be changed once you've put in that application. So if you're waiting to hear about a grant, make sure that that person's email address is monitored. Can you imagine how awful it would be to get back from a holiday and realize you'd missed out on a grant because you missed an email? Oh, the horror. So it's probably a good idea to add ndis.gov.au to your safe email list too. Let's assume that that hasn't happened to you. You signed your grant agreement, sent it back, and now the NDIA signs and dates the agreement as well. The day that happens is the day that your contract starts, and you can only claim expenses for grant activities after that start date. You'll meet your ILC grant manager at this point, who'll be with you throughout your project. They'll send you a copy of the grant agreement and give you a template to complete your work plan. The work plan sets out what you'll be doing and when in delivering your grant. You'll have 6 weeks to put that together and start delivering. So let's look now at what's involved in managing an ILC project. Your ILC grant manager works with grant projects to make sure that the investment made in your grant delivers outcomes. You'll give them regular reports on how things are going. And as you manage your project, they're your go-to person if you have any questions about how to work within the terms of your grant. Your work plan will be different depending on the grant. It's all templated, so it's not difficult to write. It'll include things like a project plan. A project plan is a table that shows the activities you'll do in your project. Each activity has deliverables. They're the things you'll provide as part of that activity. For example, let's say creating a peer-led advisory group is one of your activities. The deliverables might be advertising to find the participants, holding your first meeting, and reporting on the outcomes of that meeting. For each deliverable, there will be how it will be done and a start and finish date. Also in the work plan, there will be KPIs or key performance indicators for project reporting. As well as the project plan, your work plan might have a stakeholder engagement plan. This is going to just simply record who your stakeholders are, what your relationship is, and what you're going to do to keep them engaged throughout your project. For each activity, you'll put in a progress report about how many, who, how much was delivered, and the status on a regular basis. So that's the work plan and reporting you can respect. Remember, you will be given a template to use by your grant manager, so you won't need to create this yourself. Just provide regular reports and updates. Now, let's look at how one organisation is managing delivery of its ILC project. As well as auspicing the disability elders of all ages, Purple Orange runs its own ILC project, Inclusive School Communities. It aims to make mainstream primary and secondary schools more accessible and inclusive for children with disability and their families. People living with disability co-design and co-deliver the project activities. In the project, school leaders already using inclusive practices join with inclusive school mentors. They're young people living with disability, and they bring their experience to help the school reflect on and improve its policy and practices so that they support diversity and inclusion. Over time, these communities of practice will identify different ways to build inclusion for learning, culture, and leadership. These will be made into an inclusive schools toolkit. It'll always be growing and accessible to all schools to help inclusive practices spread. Now, the first community of practice is already in operation, with 5 schools meeting regularly to discuss and develop inclusive school practices. This first group will help influence and inspire a second cohort of schools, and Purple Orange is recruiting 7 schools for that second cohort now. We'll be talking more with Letitia Rose, the Inclusive Schools Project Leader, in our live Q&A next Monday, the 5th of August. One of her hot tips for delivering an ILC project: keep your eyes on the ball and be ready to pivot. Things can change, so in order to meet the outcomes you'd intended, you might need to change your work plan. As long as you're still using your funds, for the purpose you agreed in your grant, this is often okay. You just need to check with your NDIS grant manager. For example, Purple Orange originally planned to have one school leader and one student rep attend community of practice meetings, but they found in practice that schools had difficulty sourcing a suitable student to come along. So they had to think creatively about other ways to meet their objective to strengthen student voice, and that would work for each school. So Purple Orange now has 2 school leaders from each school going to the community of practice meetings, and they're also working with individual schools to support involvement and leadership of students in their school's development of inclusive practices. Letitia's second hot tip, build learning into your project. While you'll need to show how you'll measure and evaluate your project in your grant application, the actual design of your research questions themselves can actually be worked out while your project's running. Purple Orange's application said which activities and outcomes they'd measure and gave examples of the type of qualitative and quantitative data they'd collect. But the actual design of the research, like the questions they'd ask, has been informed by what they've learned while running the project. As well as collecting their own learning, Purple Orange decided to appoint a consultant to act as their overall project evaluator for 2 reasons. First, workload, and secondly, to provide an independent view. An independent evaluation is a good approach to assess your project's success. It can be helpful if you might want to continue or expand your project beyond your ILC grant. If you want an independent evaluation for your project, you can build it into your budget. So you can learn a lot while your project's running. Your project may be simple, or it may have lots of moving parts. Good organisation is important, but so are the relationships with your stakeholders. At the end of the day, project management is about relationships between activities and outcomes, inputs and outputs, and all of these are delivered by people. That brings us to our next hot tip. Take care of your stakeholders and your projects will run more smoothly. That is especially important when engaging with many different groups. So, as well as being organised, good project management means having good interpersonal skills, the ability to mediate and negotiate change. As project manager for the Disability Elders of All Ages ILC project, Kathryn Mills sees her role as a facilitator, not the boss. The disability elders retain full power in and ownership of decision making, while Kathryn keeps the project and its deliverables on track towards the outcome. As part of this, Kathryn brokers the relationship between the Disability Elders of All Ages and Purple Orange. The 2 organisations started their relationship with a shared vision, and now Kathryn works to keep the communication open and maintain a strong relationship as the project develops. It's also really vital to recognise the contribution that all the stakeholders make to the success of the project. That might quite simply be acknowledgement, but it can also be financial. Remember that there's a world of difference between asking someone for their quick opinion, like answering a survey, and asking someone to provide significant time and expertise. People with disability are often asked to do a lot for free. So here's another hot tip. If you're involving people with disability in co-design and delivery of your project, in fact, in any job that would otherwise be paid, then pay them. Both Purple Orange and SACID are doing this with their ILC projects. You might find great talent among your stakeholders, and you'll be helping people with disability move from voluntary work to paid roles. So we're near the end of today's session. One final hot tip. Team up with others and skill up if you need to. With a strong idea and good planning and the right opportunity, you could succeed in running a great ILC project. And we're here to help you. Whether you're experienced or just starting out with your first grant, coming along to our workshops will allow you to meet others in your area who also want to make a more inclusive community, to develop your idea. So even if you don't have one, you can come along, and leave with an action plan of things your organisation would need to do to be ready for future ILC grant rounds. You can also apply for one-to-one support to develop your idea. 20 South Australian organisations will be granted free support from a CBB consultant, and applications are open now. ILC Ready is funded by South Australia's Department of Human Services through its NDIA Community Inclusion and Capacity Development Grant, which means that this webinar series and the workshop is free for anyone to access. So now it's time for our live Q&A, and joining us we have Kathryn Mills from Disability Elders of All Ages. How are you, Kathryn?
I'm well. How are you, Meg?
Yeah, really good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We already have a few questions ready for you, Kathryn. But if there's any others that come to anyone, please do feel free to click on questions or email us at ilc@cbb.com.au, and we'll pose those questions to Kathryn and have a good chat. Before you go today, please do also make sure, everyone, that you take a moment to click on polls at the bottom of the screen and let us know how we did. That's one way that we're measuring our outcome to get South Australian organisations ILC ready. So, Kathryn, the first question that we have for you today is from Mike. We heard about how the Disability Elders Project worked with its stakeholders to develop. Mike's asking, what would you advise other peer network projects to consider? What could they learn from your experience?
Is this in terms of auspicing?
I think he's just talking in terms of developing a peer-led network. Yep.
Yeah. So I wasn't at Disability Elders from the beginning. However, when communicating with Disability Elders, they've told me it's all about having a shared vision. So when I came on board, there wasn't a shared vision among group members. So when I came on, I talked to the elders and was able to create with them together what they thought the purpose of their peer network was. And I think that's very important. So there needs to be consistency and among group members of why they're there and how they see their future.
Yep. And then that shared vision also, of course, was I think, we'd mentioned that it was important as well in, that being aligned with your auspicing organisation, Purple Orange, as well.
Yeah, definitely. I guess one of the challenges with auspicing is that there needs to be a trust among the auspicor and the auspicee, and that relates to the shared vision. So when you're writing grant applications or things like that for the auspicee, it's important to keep their values in mind as well as your own, and that helps with trust and communication and building that relationship into the future.
Great. So, Kathryn, we'll come back to a couple more of the other questions in a moment. But before we do, what activities do you think were the most helpful to you in planning your application? Because I do understand that the Disability Elders did apply a few times before they won. What do you think it was that was most helpful to you in winning this grant?
I guess keeping the Disability Elders vision in mind. And unfortunately, with the ILC grant that we did win, there was only a 4-week time block to when we found out about the applications or when the applications were open until when they were due. So we weren't able to collaborate with the Disability Elders as much as we would have liked. However, we looked at the previous grant applications that we had applied for that weren't successful and thought of ways that we could create something new out of these. So work with the applications that we've already got and make things, I guess, a bit more new and different so that it can be successful, and also seek feedback from the elders with the application. Yeah.
So the fact that you already had an idea of what your vision was and where you wanted to go was obviously helpful with that time frame.
Yes.
Yep. Great. I'm going to answer the next question from Mike myself, I think. So Mike now asks, for people with disability interested in proposing a peer network project, who can they discuss basic challenges like how much time they might need to commit and how the project grant can support their participation? For example, dealing with some specific costs Mike's mentioned here, like travel time and communicating costs. Mike, I think that's probably a question that you'd need to look carefully at the requirements of the specific grant round that you're applying for. These are the sorts of questions that would need to be directed to the NDIA in terms of what are eligible activities within a specific grant. But if what you need is help with some of the challenges around project management and planning, then I'd suggest that you think about applying for one-to-one support from CBB, because we will be granting 20 organisations the opportunity to work one-on-one and try and work through some of those challenges that you might have around applying for ILC funding and your project. So I hope that helps. Did you have anything to add on that general topic, Kathryn?
No, I think you answered that quite well.
Okay, great. The next question that Mike has is around the Grant Hub feedback. He is saying that didn't help them work out how the application could have been approved. Mike, I do think if you bring your past learning to the workshop, that would be fantastic. And we could certainly use that time in the workshop to reflect on some of those things there. But also with our workshops, we're hoping to get lots of people with lots of different experience in the room to learn from each other. So please do bring that along. Kathryn, just on that topic, I'm curious, what has been your experience with getting feedback on grants that you were unsuccessful with? Was that helpful or at all for you in deciding how you'd attack the next grant that you tried for?
I can't actually answer that question, as the grants that we had applied for and weren't successful, I wasn't actually in the role at the time.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
You did say that before. Okay, and the next question, here's a great one. Thank you, Leanne. Do you have any suggestions, Kathryn, for advertising and enticing people with disability to be involved in peer network groups? How would you get new participants?
There are lots of different ways to advertise your peer network and get more participants. Social media is one of the best ways. I'm also chair of Julia Fire Youth, and we do a lot of social media promotion to get people to come along to our peer networks, and we also do that through disability elders as well. Another thing is through word of mouth, actually getting your participants, members of the peer network in the program, to talk to their friends. Or sometimes we do a thing, we have meetings where we're like, all right, each member bring a friend or someone they know who would benefit from the peer network, and that's a way to entice members to come along.
Great. And what about in terms of the content of what's on at the meetings? Because there's promoting it and then there's, the actual thing that's going to happen. What's important in that in terms of creating something that is of value to that peer network? Yeah.
So I get the disability elders to actually come up with the topics themselves for meetings. So they suggest things and we're like, oh, this guest speaker would be fantastic, or this topic I'd really like to talk about with everyone else. And in terms of content, if I have an idea that the elders haven't thought of, I talk to them and I actually ask them, hey, would you like this to happen, or would you benefit from having this conversation with the other elders? And that's just a way to, I guess, continue the conversation and ensure that it is in the peer network members' hands, not my hands. Because like I mentioned when I was talking to Meg, that they're the boss, I'm not.
Great. Now, I think, do we have any other questions? There's one here about a separate grant program, and I'll answer that for you separately, Jen. So before we go today, was there anything else that you wanted to add, Kathryn, about your experiences and I guess even what excites you about the future for your program and what's happening through your ILC grants?
I would really love to share a great story about an auspicor and an auspicee relationship. How this works is there was a conversation at a Disley Elders meeting about the plastic straws and the importance of them for people living with physical disability. I was able, through that conversation, I talked to JSA Purple Orange, the auspicor, and I told them that, this is an important issue, and then through that we created a podcast. That podcast got sent to media, including The Project and ABC, and then they got back to Purple Orange and wanted to talk to someone. So we got the auspicee, Disley Elders, to be able to feature on those media outlets. And through that, the state government had contacted Purple Orange, and now there'll be a representative from Disley Elders on the task force about single-use plastics. I say this story because it reinforces the benefits of auspicing, and also when you do have a strong communication and a shared vision and shared goals, wonderful and amazing things can come out of it.
And nothing that was planned in your ILC project either, but that relationship there has obviously created a fantastic opportunity to, do something around an issue that's important.
Yeah, and it does create, contribute to our outcomes of the project and the ILC, because we are gaining momentum around disability and the issues, which is one of the things that they wanted to do as part of the ILC project.
Yep. Yeah. Fantastic. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that story with me, Kathryn, and thank you for all of your input. Actually, it was wonderful to meet you and for you to share your experiences with your ILC project with everyone. So before we go now, you're welcome to stay on the line through this as well, Kathryn. And again, thank you for your time. Joining me, we're going to have Dr. Ellen Schuler. Ellen is one of the other consultants here at CBB, and along with me, Ellen will be doing some of the workshops that we'll be travelling around with this month. The deadline for booking those workshops is actually tomorrow. So we're hoping that if you're interested, you can book in online at our website, cbb.com.au/ILC. But I'm welcoming Ellen now to the screen. So I'll just shuffle over a little bit.
Hello.
Hi. Now you've got both of us. So if anyone has any questions about our program, feel free to fire away and ask. But while we're waiting for questions to come up, I guess maybe we'll just do a little bit of an overview. What do you think, Ellen? Yep. So the ILC workshops are really designed to create a space where you can learn some skills and play with some potential ILC project ideas, and then also leave with an action plan of the sort of things that you might need to do as an organisation to get ready to develop a project idea to a point where you'd be ready to make an application. So, Ellen, what do you think people can expect to get out of the workshops more specifically? That's generally, we'll be sharing some tools. What kind of tools will we be sharing?
Well, we'll be looking at a very simple design approach that you can use to design your project, but also to plan your project and to evaluate your project. And you will also learn to develop a theory of change, which is very useful for ILC, but it is also useful for any project for social impact.
So you don't need to, I think that's really important as well, is that you don't need to be sure that you want to do ILC at the moment. You can still come along to this program and develop some skills.
No, not at all. It's what you learn is useful for any project, any project planning, any grant application. So we really hope to inspire you about ILC and get you on board to create change in your communities. But if you haven't got an idea yet, please still come along, because we're going to look at potential ideas, and we're going to look at how you actually can involve your communities in creating ideas for ILC grants.
Yep. And we've had so many awesome examples on this webinar series, I think, as well, of organisations who've done just that. So it's also an opportunity, I think, to collaborate. So we're hoping to see all kinds of organisations at these workshops. So whether you're in local government or you're a disability service provider, you could be a community group like the Disability Elders of All Ages who isn't incorporated. You know, come along, and certainly what we'll find in the room, I think, are like-minded people who all think that it's important to have our communities inclusive of everybody. So it should be a great day.
Definitely.
Yep. Now, have we got any other questions there?
No.
No? Okay. Kathryn, do you have any questions about the workshops?
I don't actually, but I'm keen to hear more about them into the future and how they go.
We will definitely keep you in touch. So thank you very much for your time today in our Q&A, Kathryn, and thank you to all of you for joining in, sharing your comments and questions. A big thank you to all of our case studies who generously shared their stories with us. They were the Australian Migrant Resource Centre, HCO, the Disability Elders of All Ages, Julia Farr Youth or JFY, and Purple Orange. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you at the workshops. Don't forget to register. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you, Meg.
Thanks.
Bye.